Although I ended up leaving the denomination in which I was raised, I grew up in quite a wonderful faith community for little children. There were tons of kids, and the church really had the spiritual shepherding of children as a top priority. Most of my memories from church in early childhood center on the wonder of God and the awe of being alive. People of all ages being together in church, and adults singing children's hymns as part of the regular service as we processed out to Children's Chapel with a cross just before the sermon, like our own kids at St. Paul's here do. Gathering around a huge font for baptisms. I had to stand on my tiptoes to rest my arms on the edge to get a better view. The font was stone and had a waterfall so that you were reminded of the sound of baptismal water every time you entered the church. And the water could even be heated for baptisms. It's a trick we do so the babies don't cry. It's wonderful. When people walked in the church, they would dip their hand in the font and make the sign of the cross. And when the water was warm, my dad would lean over to me as we walked in and say, "We're dunking some babies today." I remember hearing and reading Bible stories and seeing adults outside of my family excited about these stories, about church, and about God. As a teenager, I felt very conflicted when I realized that I would need to search for a new faith system that was more congruent with what I was experiencing of God. And so, in college, I absolutely loved getting to experience the Episcopal Church for the first time through the perspective of one of my best friends, just as I was finding this new church myself. My friend and I met during orientation weekend as we moved in across the hall from one another, and we were both in the same English 101 Shakespeare class. One day, just a meeting or two into the class, we were both reading for this class in the common room of our dorm, and she began to lament. "What the hell is this allusion to a garden in the footnotes? Is this something I'm supposed to know already?" It was that early part of college where we were both trying to quietly figure out how much we were already supposed to know. "Oh, that's just the Garden of Eden," I told her. "The Garden of what?" she replied. And that's when I found out my new best friend was raised agnostic, and she still is agnostic today. If you like Shakespeare, you'll know that basically every page of the plays is filled with jokes and references to these Bible stories we hear in church from week to week. Within a couple more class periods, my friend decided that if she was going to pass this class, she needed to sit down and read the Bible, all of it, from the beginning. I can tell you that she did not make it as far as the 22nd chapter of Genesis that we heard today, because we would have had some very lively discussion. In church, especially when we hear stories like the binding of Isaac, I often think of people like my friend and those who were not raised Christian or with these stories in their background. This is a truly wild story. And for those of us who grew up with these Bible stories, it's easy to forget how truly weird and wild a lot of them are. Newcomers and their perspective are such a gift. If you knew nothing of Christianity or the Bible and wanted to learn more, it would make total sense to just pick up the Bible and begin reading. And if you could make it as far as about 22 pages in, you would find this story. And what would you think? What would you make of this God that Christians seem so excited about? Christians themselves don't seem to know what to do with this story a lot of times. I know I really don't know what to do with it a lot of times. A number of years ago, Devin and I were visiting Chartres Cathedral in France, and I was captivated by the statue of Abraham and Isaac on the north porch. In the statue, both father and son look up toward heaven in the same direction, almost cuddling one another. In one hand, Abraham holds a knife next to his own throat, out of his son's sight. And in the other hand, he gently cradles Isaac's head upward. The boy is only about as tall as Abraham's stomach. He could be running around at a St. Paul's coffee hour. The statue shows the tenderness that we hear in this brutal story of a father who carries the knife and the fire up the mountain in case the boy who is about to be sacrificed might accidentally hurt himself on the way up to his own death. In the statue, Isaac's feet and hands are bound, but his face is so trusting, so hopeful. It's excited even as he looks up. Abraham looks worried, or maybe sad or pensive, perhaps haltingly trusting. I really can't name it. I think that's what holds it, that captivation in the statue for me. He gazes upward in the same direction as Isaac, but it's not fully on the same trajectory. It's like Abraham can't quite look God in the eye. I was so captivated by the statue that I bought a photograph of it in the cathedral gift shop and had it framed. For the past couple of years since moving to Charlottesville, this has been the image to which I've woken up on the wall beside my bed. Some days I think, wow, I am so weird. Why did I hang this photograph up here to see every morning? Other days, I try to make sense of the story. Trust, putting God first, the unknown, obligations, a promise, pain, relief. Why? Why is really the question I end up with. And like so much of life, I'm left with the answer, I don't know. Some Christians have a straightforward answer to this story. This is the moment where we see the Israelites distinguish themselves from their neighbors as worshiping a God who does not require child sacrifice. Maybe, but that can't be everything that the story is about. After all, God sends those two people up that mountain, and Abraham is only stopped at the last second as he holds the knife in the air above his son's throat. Other Christians turn away from the story completely, dismissing it as the angry God of the Old Testament. I think that's too easy, though, too. This is the same God we see in the New Testament, and I do not believe that this God is bloodthirsty, especially for children. This is the same God who sent their own only Son, God's own heart, God's own self, vulnerable into this world that can be so cruel in order to show us how to love. And when that son was laid down upon the altar of our systems of oppression, we ourselves did not cry, "Stop, no blood is needed," like God does in the story that we hear today. Our world yelled, "Crucify him." I don't know why. Some scholars have called the story of Abraham and Isaac the most difficult story in the Bible. I think it's okay if we don't have an easy answer for everything that's going on in it. That mirrors life, doesn't it? Especially when folks who are newer than us to church ask us what something means and we're at a loss. It can feel like there is so much pressure to know the answer. But the true answer is always the best one, in my opinion, especially when it's, "I'm not sure." "I'm not sure" is invitational. It acknowledges that we can't know everything and that we need each other because life is a process of unfolding. It puts a trust in God, like Abraham's trust, that God will provide if we continue to do our work of seeking and learning and growing together. It allows wondering and mutual exploration. It makes space for everyone, especially newcomers, to teach us all. It is implicitly and explicitly asking, "What do you think is going on in this story?" Whatever is going on, what Abraham is left with is a feeling of God providing for him and all who come after him, which includes us as Christians and our Jewish siblings and our Muslim siblings who are actually celebrating the feast of this story today. Abraham names the mountain where all this happened, "The Lord will provide." The very thing that Abraham told his son as they hiked up that mountain. In perhaps the most difficult story of the Bible, what we are left with are glimpses of understanding, the wonderings and experience of our community, and the words, "The Lord will provide." The Lord will provide. It kind of mirrors some of the hardest stories of our own lives, doesn't it?